My name is Quinn Byrne. I'm 67 years old, and 4 months ago, I bought the first house that ever had just my name on the deed. Then my daughter-in-law posted in the family group chat that her parents were moving in. If I didn't like it, she said, I could go back to living in her apartment. I said nothing back. Not that night, not the next morning. 3 weeks earlier, I'd already filed something with a lawyer. Nobody in my family knew it existed. What happened on moving day, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Alpha Mom Stories. This channel is where mothers who spent their whole lives giving finally learn to keep something for themselves. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The cabin sits on the north shore of Lake Anders outside a small town called Cedar Hollow, Wisconsin. 2 bedrooms, pine floors that creak in exactly one spot by the kitchen window. A dock out back, gray wood worn soft by 30 summers of other people's feet before mine. I bought it in March, 4 months ago now. My husband Robert and I talked about a place like this for years. We never got around to it. He was sick for 4 years before he died. Colon cancer, the kind that takes its time and takes everything with it. 3 years ago this September, I buried him and went back to teaching because I didn't know what else to do with a Tuesday. I taught 3rd grade for 34 years, Cedar Hollow Elementary. Retired last year with a pension, a life insurance payout, and a strange, quiet permission to finally ask myself what I wanted. What I wanted was quiet. Not a mansion, not a legacy, just water outside my window and nobody's schedule but mine. The paperwork alone took 11 weeks. Title searches, inspections, a septic issue that delayed closing twice. I didn't tell many people how long it took, or how close I came to walking away from it, twice. The asking price was $289,000. Robert's life insurance and my pension buyout covered most of it. Not all of it. I'll get to that part. I didn't want a mansion. I wanted quiet. Quiet has a price too. I just didn't expect to have to defend it. There's a navy blue fireproof box on the top shelf of my bedroom closet. It's small, the kind you'd keep passports in, or a will. Inside it, the deed to the cabin, the title insurance policy, and Robert's will. He'd left one clear instruction inside it that whatever I bought after him would belong to me alone, no matter what happened later with Daniel's inheritance. I hadn't reread the whole document since the funeral. I kept meaning to. I kept not doing it. What almost nobody knows is that the insurance payout didn't quite cover the purchase. It came in about $40,000 short of what I needed, after the inspection issues added unexpected costs. I didn't ask my son Daniel for help. I didn't ask his wife Brooke either, not after the comment she made about my pension at Thanksgiving the year before. Instead, I sold my wedding rings. Both of them, the engagement ring and the band. And I sold 4 acres of farmland my grandmother left me in Ohio, land I'd never once visited, land that meant nothing to me except the number it turned into at closing. Nobody in my family knows that. I never planned to hide it exactly. It just never came up because nobody ever asked how I'd managed it. They assumed the insurance covered everything. I let them assume it. The rings sold for $6,200 at a jeweler in Milwaukee. The Ohio land, which a cousin had been half-heartedly farming for me since my grandmother died, brought in $33,000 more after the realtor's fee. It wasn't quite the full $40,000, so I covered the rest from savings I'd built teaching summer school for a decade. It was the first house that ever had just my name on the paper. Only mine, not Robert's and mine, not the house we raised Daniel in, split down some legal middle if things had gone differently. Just mine, earned in a way nobody in my family had bothered to ask about. I liked it that way. I still do, mostly. I wear a necklace most days now. A small silver pendant, a single stone set in a plain setting. It doesn't look like much. A jeweler in town made it for me 2 years ago out of the diamond from my old engagement ring before I sold the band and the setting for scrap gold value. I told myself it was practical, a way to keep something without keeping everything. Last Thanksgiving at Daniel and Brooke's apartment, Brooke made a joke while she was carving the turkey. She said, "Must be nice living off a teacher's pension and still affording all this," and gestured vaguely at nothing in particular, since I hadn't bought anything that year except a bottle of wine for the table. The room laughed, the easy kind of laugh people do when they're not sure if something was a joke or not, but they'd rather not find out. I laughed, too. I passed the cranberry sauce. I didn't correct her. Didn't explain that teachers in Wisconsin retire with pensions built over 34 years of contributions. Didn't mention that I understood exactly how much things cost, because I'd spent 4 years negotiating hospital bills line by line while my husband was dying. I let it go. I've let a lot of things go over the years. Small comments, small assumptions, the quiet family habit of deciding I was the one who wouldn't mind. That was before I understood letting go has a limit. I just hadn't found mine yet. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon in May while I was refinishing the dock railing with a coat of sealant. My phone buzzed on the porch step. A notification from the family group chat, 11 of us, cousins, in-laws, my sister-in-law from Green Bay. Brooke had posted, "My parents are moving into the lake house next month. It's bigger than our place, and Quinn barely uses all those rooms. Excited for them to finally have some stability." 3 heart emojis followed from cousins who had no idea what they were agreeing to. I set the paintbrush down and read it twice. Then I texted Brooke privately, asking her to call me so we could talk it through properly. She called within the minute, like she'd been waiting. "I figured it made sense to just let everyone know the plan," she said, breezy, like she was describing a carpool schedule. "My parents need somewhere stable. You've got 2 extra rooms just sitting there." "Brooke, that's my home. This is the first I'm hearing about any plan." "It's not that complicated, Quinn. They lost their place. You have space. I don't understand why this needs to be a whole thing." I asked her, as calmly as I could manage, whether she'd meant to ask me before telling the group chat it was already decided. There was a pause, then her voice sharpened, just slightly. "If you don't like it, go back to the apartment. You could stay with Daniel and me instead. See how that feels for a while." I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the water instead, at the small waves the wind was pushing toward the dock. It wasn't a question she'd asked me. It was an announcement, dressed up as a courtesy call, made after the decision, not before it. I thanked her for calling, said I needed to think, and hung up before either of us said something we'd have to walk back later. Here's what I knew about Brooke's parents, Gary and Denise Halloway, before that phone call. 6 weeks earlier, their landlord had sold the duplex they'd rented for 11 years. New owner wanted it vacant for renovations, gave them 60 days, which is legal in Wisconsin, but not exactly generous. Gary is 61, works part-time at a hardware store since his knees gave out on him doing flooring work. Denise is 63, does the books for a dental office 2 towns over. They'd been staying on Daniel and Brooke's pull-out couch since the eviction notice. 1-bedroom apartment, 620 square feet, 4 adults. Some nights when I visited, everyone stepping around each other in a space built for 2. I felt for them. I want to say that clearly because it's true, and because what happened later doesn't erase it. Losing a home at 61 isn't a moral failing. It's just hard, and it happens to good people and careless people in roughly equal measure. But I also remembered something else. 3 years ago, before Daniel and Brooke married, Gary asked Daniel to co-sign a truck loan with him. Gary's credit wasn't strong even then, a bankruptcy from his 30s still on the report, some missed payments after a layoff. I told Daniel gently that co-signing meant he'd be legally responsible for payments Gary might not make. Daniel listened. He didn't co-sign. Gary got the loan on his own eventually, with a higher interest rate and a shorter term, and made every payment on time for 3 years, which I gave him real credit for, privately, even if I never said so out loud. Denise never quite let the other part go. She'd mention it sometimes sideways at holidays. Some people don't trust family the way they should. I never asked her to say it to my face. She never did. She just let it sit underneath every conversation we had after that, a small stone in her shoe she refused to shake out. I called Daniel that evening. He picked up on the fourth ring, background noise behind him, dishes clinking. Mom, hey, look, I know Brooke already talked to you. She told me her parents are moving into my house next month. I want to hear it from you. Is that the plan you two have agreed to? A long pause. Longer than I wanted. It's complicated. Denise keeps bringing up how Gary helped us out with the truck a few years back, like we owe them for it. And they really don't have anywhere else, Mom. I don't love it either, honestly. Did you ask me before Brooke told the entire family it was settled? I mean, no, not exactly. She said she'd handle talking to you. I sat with that for a second, the phone warm against my ear. I'm not asking you to choose sides, Daniel. I'm asking you to remember whose name is on the deed. I know, Mom. I know. It's just Brooke gets really stressed about her parents, and when she gets like that, it's easier to just let her handle things her way. That sentence told me more than anything else he said that night. Easier to let her handle things her way. I wondered how many other decisions in his marriage had been made under that same quiet logic. Which apartment to rent, which car to lease, whether to visit his own mother on a Sunday or a Tuesday. Think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking tonight. He didn't say anything for a while. I could hear him breathing, and somewhere behind him the television and Brooke's voice asking who he was talking to. I walked down to the dock the next morning with my coffee still turning the phone call over in my head when my neighbor, Marilyn Foss, came out onto her own porch next door. Marilyn is 70, moved to Lake Andrews 4 years ago after 31 years practicing real estate law in Milwaukee. Retired now mostly. She grows tomatoes badly and reads mystery novels well. And in the 2 months I'd lived here, she'd become the closest thing I had to a friend outside my own family. You look like a woman who didn't sleep, she said, crossing over with her own mug. I told her everything. The group chat, the phone call, the line about going back to the apartment. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. You don't owe anyone an explanation for owning what you paid for Quinn, she said finally. But you might want it in writing anyway. Not because you'll need it, because it'll help you sleep. In writing, how? There's a young attorney in town, Priya Whitfield. Does mostly landlord-tenant work, some residential real estate. I'm not licensed anymore, so I can't tell you what to do legally, but I can tell you who to call. Marilyn had recommended 2 clients to her over the years, both times for exactly this kind of quiet, unglamorous paperwork nobody wants to need until they need it badly. I asked her why it mattered if it was already my house, already my name on everything. Because right now, she said, it's your word against a family group chat that already believes something different. Paper doesn't get talked over at Thanksgiving. I wrote the number down on the back of a grocery receipt next to a reminder to buy more coffee filters. I didn't call that day. I let it sit on the counter for 2 full days, half hoping the whole situation might resolve itself without my having to make it more official than a phone call in my own kitchen. It didn't. I called 2 days later. Denise called me that Thursday. I almost didn't pick up. Quinn, hi, it's Denise. I just wanted to talk mother to mother. Her voice had a practiced warmth to it, the kind people use right before asking for something large. We raised Brooke to think of family as family, she said, not something you measure out in square footage. It's just a house, Quinn. You don't even need all that space for one person. I let a beat pass before I answered. I understand you and Gary are in a hard spot. I really do. But it would have meant something if someone had asked me instead of telling me. There's a difference between those 2 things, even if it doesn't always feel like it from where you're standing. Nobody's trying to take anything from you. We're trying to survive. Gary hasn't slept right in 6 weeks. Do you understand what that's like at our age, not knowing where you'll be next month? I did understand it more than she knew. I understood insurance denials and hospital corridors at 2 a.m, the particular exhaustion of not knowing whether tomorrow would require a fight or just quiet endurance. I didn't say that. It wasn't a competition I wanted to enter, and grief doesn't usually improve for being compared against someone else's. There was a version of this conversation where I told her exactly what 4 years of Robert's illness had cost me, in dollars and in sleep. I chose not to give her that version. Some stories aren't owed to people who are only asking so they can win an argument with them. I hear you, Denise. I need some time to think about what I'm comfortable with. Time, she repeated, like the word offended her. The truck's already looking at dates, Quinn. I ended the call as gently as I could and stood in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at nothing. That night I made a call. It wasn't to Brooke. It wasn't to Daniel either. I dialed the number Marilyn had given me and left a voicemail for Priya Whitfield, asking if she had time to meet with me about a property matter. Nothing dramatic, I said, just some questions about my rights as a homeowner. I didn't know yet how much that one phone call would end up mattering. Priya Whitfield's office was above a bakery on Main Street. 1 room, a desk, 2 chairs, a window that let in the smell of cinnamon rolls all morning. She was maybe 41, sharp-eyed, the kind of lawyer who took notes while you talked instead of waiting for you to finish. I explained the situation. The group chat the moving date Brooke had apparently already started discussing, the comment about going back to the apartment. Is the cabin solely in your name? No joint ownership? No one else on the deed? Just mine. Then legally nobody has any right to move in without your written consent. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law, not her parents. It doesn't matter what's been discussed in a group chat. A deed isn't a democracy. Something in my chest loosened slightly, hearing it said so plainly. What happens, I asked, if they show up anyway? If a truck pulls into my driveway assuming it's already decided? Priya set her pen down. Then you'd have grounds to issue a formal notice, essentially telling any occupant they need written permission to stay, with clear terms, or they'd need to vacate. If you wanted to allow a short defined stay, we could draft an occupancy agreement instead, something with an actual end date instead of an open-ended arrangement everyone just assumes will work itself out. I asked her to explain the notice option more, the one for if consent was never properly given in the first place. She mentioned something called a written notice to vacate, how it worked, how quickly it could be delivered, what it would mean if ignored, how Wisconsin law generally treated an occupant without a lease as a guest at the owner's discretion, not a tenant with independent rights. Most people never need this part, Priya said, but it's better to have it drafted and sitting in a drawer than to need it and not have it ready. I didn't decide anything that day, but I asked her to draft both documents just in case. Brooke invited me to dinner that Sunday, framed as a casual family thing. When I arrived, Gary and Denise were already at the table. So was Brooke's cousin Tasha, 26, who I'd met maybe twice before. It felt less like dinner and more like a meeting I hadn't agreed to attend. Brooke served pasta and started talking before anyone had finished sitting down. We just think it makes the most sense for everyone. My parents get stability, you get help with the yard and upkeep since it's a lot for one person, and honestly, it keeps things simple. I let her finish. I ate a few bites. Gary stared at his plate. I think what makes sense for everyone, I said finally, should probably include the person who owns the house. The table went quiet for a second. Tasha glanced at me, then at her plate, clearly uncomfortable being there. Brooke recovered fast. Nobody's trying to leave you out of the conversation, Quinn. It doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like an announcement I'm supposed to catch up to. Later, while Brooke was clearing plates, Tasha leaned toward me at the sink, voice low. Are you okay with this? Because it doesn't really sound like you are. I didn't answer her directly. I just said I appreciated her asking. It was a small thing, that question, but it was the first time in weeks anyone in that family had asked what I actually wanted, instead of telling me what I should be fine with. I thanked her for it on my way out the door and meant it more than the words probably conveyed. Gary finally spoke up near the end of dinner, voice quieter than his wife's or his daughter's. "We wouldn't be any trouble, Quinn, just until we're back on our feet." I looked at him directly, and for a moment I saw something almost like shame in his face, the particular kind men his age carry when they've lost something they were supposed to protect. "Gary, I don't doubt that you mean that. Can I ask what 'back on your feet' actually looks like? Is there a timeline? A plan for what comes after?" Silence. Denise jumped in before he could answer. "We're looking. It's not easy right now. The rental market's terrible." "I'm not asking to be difficult," I said. "I'm asking because temporary, without a plan, tends to become permanent by accident. I've seen it happen in other families. I don't want it to happen in mine." Brooke's voice sharpened again. "Why does everything with you have to be a negotiation? We're talking about my parents having somewhere safe to sleep, and you're asking for a spreadsheet?" I didn't rise to it. I finished my water, set the glass down carefully. Gary hadn't lied to me that night, I think. He genuinely believed it would be temporary. But belief isn't a plan, and Gary had spent the whole conversation letting his wife and daughter build a decision around him, the same way he'd let Denise carry the anger about the truck loan for 3 years instead of addressing it himself. His silence wasn't cruelty, but it wasn't nothing either. Silence rarely is in families like ours. It just tends to get mistaken for peace, until the bill comes due. I drove home from that dinner with the radio off, just the sound of tires on the county highway, and my own thoughts, which weren't especially kind to anyone that night, including myself. Back at the cabin, I walked down to the dock and sat on the edge of it, shoes off, feet not quite touching the water. The lake made its small, steady sound against the wood pilings, the same sound I'd fallen asleep to every night since March. I thought about the 34 years I'd spent in a classroom teaching 8-year-olds that sharing didn't mean giving away everything you had, that boundaries and kindness could live in the same sentence. I'd said that exact phrase to hundreds of children over the decades. I thought about how easily that lesson had gotten lost somewhere between the classroom and my own family's kitchen table. They thought I didn't understand money because I never talked about it. I understood money. I'd tracked every hospital bill during Robert's illness down to the dollar, argued down 2 separate insurance denials, negotiated a payment plan with an oncology practice that initially wanted $11,000 up front. I understood money. I just never needed to prove it to anyone before. I decided sitting there that I would drive to Daniel's the next day, not to fight, just to talk to my son alone, without Brooke translating for him, without Denise supplying the script. The water kept moving. It didn't ask me to explain myself, didn't need a justification for taking up the space it had always taken up. I sat with that a while longer, feet nearly numb from the cold, before I finally went inside. I drove to Daniel and Brooke's apartment the next afternoon. Brooke was already home working from the kitchen table with her laptop open. Daniel let me in, said he had a few minutes before a client call, and went to grab his phone charger from the bedroom. His phone was sitting on the kitchen counter close enough to where Brooke was sitting that she could reach it without getting up. It rang while Daniel was still down the hall. Denise's name on the screen. Brooke glanced at it, assumed it was for her since her mother called constantly that week, and answered it on speaker without checking. I wasn't trying to listen. I was standing in a kitchen the size of a closet, and the sound simply had nowhere else to go. "I already told my parents it's basically settled," Brooke said, breezy, already annoyed. "Quinn's too polite to actually say no in front of everyone. She'll grumble, but she won't actually stop it." Denise's voice tinnier through the speaker. "You're sure? Because Gary keeps asking if we have a backup plan." "We don't need a backup plan, Mom. Trust me, she's not going to make a scene. I stood very still in that kitchen, my son's coffee mug still in my hand from when I'd offered to wash it. Daniel came back into the room right as Brooke noticed I was standing there. Her face changed fast, the practiced kind of fast. "Oh, Quinn, I didn't realize you were still here." Daniel looked between us, confused, sensing something had shifted in the room, but not yet understanding what. I set the mug down on the counter carefully and didn't say anything at all. I didn't confront Brooke in that kitchen. I said I needed to get going, gave Daniel a hug that lasted a second longer than usual, and drove home with both hands steady on the wheel the entire way, which surprised me a little. I wasn't angry when I called Priya Whitfield that evening. I was done being polite about something that was never actually up for discussion. But the two feelings aren't quite the same thing, and I want to be honest about the difference. "I'd like the written notice drafted," I told her. "The one about guest terms and consent to occupy. I want it formal, dated, ready to send." "Do you want me to send it now before anything else happens?" I thought about that for a long moment. "No," I said. "Let it happen. Let them move the boxes in if that's what they've decided to do. I'll have you there, not in the room, just reachable, and I'll have the paperwork with me. I want them to see it, not just receive it in the mail after the fact." Priya didn't argue with that. She asked a few clarifying questions, confirmed the moving date once I had it, and told me she'd have everything finalized within the week. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark kitchen for a while, the cabin quiet around me, the lake barely visible through the window in the last gray light. Brooke had said I wouldn't make a scene. She was right about that, actually. I had no intention of making a scene. I intended to make a point instead. That weekend, I took the Navy box down from the closet shelf and went through everything inside it slowly, the way you do when you want to make sure you actually understand what you own. The deed. The title insurance policy still crisp, barely 4 months old. And Robert's will, which I finally reread in full for the first time since the funeral. He'd been specific about one thing. Any property I purchased after his death, using funds from his life insurance, would remain entirely mine, separate from any future estate division involving Daniel. We'd talked about it once, near the end, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and the flowers I kept bringing that he was too tired to really see. "Whatever you build after me," he'd said, "build it so it's actually yours." I hadn't thought about that sentence in months. Sitting on my bedroom floor with the box open in my lap, I thought about it for a long time. It felt less like a rule and more like something Robert had trusted me to carry alone. And I decided right there on the floor that whatever happened on moving day, I'd be carrying that promise into the room with me too, even if nobody else ever knew it was there. Priya emailed me the finalized notice that Monday, a formal document confirming sole ownership and outlining terms for any guest occupancy beyond a short visit. I read it twice, then signed it in the space she'd marked my signature. Small and steady. Brooke texted the same day. The moving truck was booked. 2 weeks from Saturday, she said, Gary and Denise's things would start arriving in the morning. I closed the box, locked it with the small combination lock only I knew the code to, and set it by my nightstand instead of back in the closet. I wanted it close for what was coming. Daniel showed up at the cabin alone on a Wednesday evening. No warning, Brooke's car nowhere in the driveway. He sat on the porch step, elbows on his knees, looking younger than 36. For a moment, "You doing okay, Mom?" "I'm managing," I said, which was true and also not the whole truth. He was quiet for a while, watching the water. "I feel like I'm stuck between the two most important women in my life, and I don't know how to make either of you happy right now." "I'm not asking you to make me happy, Daniel. I'm asking you to pay attention to what's actually happening." He looked over at me. "What do you mean, dot?" I chose my next words carefully. I didn't mention the overheard call. Not yet. "Did you know Brooke already told her parents this was settled before she ever actually asked me? His face shifted, something clicking slowly into place. She told me it was still up for discussion with you. That's what she said when I asked her about the group chat post. When was that conversation, the group chat post? Like 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago was before Denise's phone call about square footage, before the ambush dinner, before the overheard call in his own kitchen. I didn't lay all of that out for him that evening. I let him sit with the smaller piece I'd given him instead and watched something uneasy settle into his expression. The particular look of a person starting to recalculate a story they'd trusted without ever quite examining it. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit from childhood I recognized instantly. The same gesture he used to make before admitting he'd broken something and hadn't told me yet. She told me it was still being talked out, he said again, quieter this time, like repeating it might change what it meant. Harper's 4th birthday party was that Saturday, a backyard gathering at Daniel and Brooks' building, balloons taped crooked to the fence, a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery. My granddaughter, delighted and covered in frosting, was the only person there who seemed entirely unaware that anything in the family had shifted. Denise cornered me near the drink cooler, a plastic cup of lemonade in her hand, a few cousins close enough to hear. Some people just don't know how to share what they have, she said, not quite looking at me, loud enough for the comment to land where she wanted it to. I didn't answer her directly. I thought instead about the phone call weeks earlier, Brooks' voice breezy and certain. If you don't like it, go back to the apartment. I turned that sentence over silently while Denise waited for a reaction she didn't get. I smiled, instead wished Harper a happy birthday again, and let the comment sit in the air unanswered. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just timing. Denise seemed almost disappointed by how little effect her comment had. She refilled her lemonade and drifted toward Gary, who was helping Harper blow bubbles near the fence line, oblivious gentle with his granddaughter, in a way that made it hard to stay simply angry at him. I stayed another hour, sang the birthday song, took a photo of Harper with cake on her nose that I still have saved on my phone. 9 days remained until the moving truck. I drove home that evening already fairly certain of exactly what I was going to do. Priya called on Monday to confirm the notice had been finalized and notarized, along with a printed copy of the county assessor's record listing me as sole owner. She offered to mail it or have me pick it up. I asked to pick it up myself. Sitting in her office that afternoon, reading through both documents one more time, I found myself touching the pendant at my throat without quite meaning to. The jeweler who reset that stone 2 years ago, an older man named Frank, with a shop 3 doors down from the bakery, had told me the diamond cut cleaner than he expected once he pulled it from the old setting. Some things hold up better once you take them out of what they were originally built for, he'd said. More about the stone than anything, though I've thought about that sentence more than once since. It's just a house, Quinn. You don't even need all that space. Denise's words, weeks old now, still sitting somewhere in my chest. I thought about the rings I'd sold to help pay for that house. I thought about the 4 acres in Ohio I'd never once visited, converted into a down payment nobody in my family knew I'd needed. It was never just a house. It was the only thing I had ever bought entirely on my own terms, without anyone else's name attached to the decision, without anyone else's approval required first. I slid both documents into a folder, thanked Priya, and drove home with the folder on the passenger seat the whole way, like a guest I didn't quite trust yet. Brooke texted me that Thursday, 3 days before the move. The truck is booked for Saturday at 9. My parents' stuff will start arriving. I really hope you're not going to make this difficult for everyone. I read it twice before responding. I didn't call this time. I typed one line back. I'll be there Saturday. No emoji, no explanation, no argument. Just that. Her reply came fast. Great, thank you for understanding. Then a minute later, a second message. This is going to be so good for everyone, I promise. I set the phone face down on the counter and didn't respond again. I want to be honest about something here. I'll be there Saturday wasn't agreement. It was simply true I would, in fact, be there. Brooke read into it whatever she needed to read into it, the same way she'd read my silence over the past 6 weeks as eventual surrender, rather than what it actually was, which was patience with a deadline attached. I've thought about that moment often since. How easily people mistake quiet for consent, especially when quiet is convenient for the story they're already telling themselves. I spent that evening reviewing the notice one more time with Priya over the phone, confirming exactly how the language worked, what it would mean if it wasn't honored on the spot. She walked me through it calmly, professionally, the way I imagine she walked dozens of other clients through similarly uncomfortable Saturdays. 3 days left. I slept better than I expected to that night, which surprised me more than anything else that week. Friday afternoon, I walked next door to see Marilyn, coffee in hand, and asked if she might be around Saturday morning. Not for anything formal, I told her. Just wanted a friendly face nearby while the move happened. She studied me for a moment over her reading glasses. You've got that look. The one where you've already decided something and you're being polite about telling me. I might have a document or two I plan to read out loud, I admitted. Well, she said, I water my tomatoes most Saturday mornings anyway, around 9 usually. I also called Priya one final time that evening, confirming the exact procedure if the Halloways didn't leave voluntarily once the notice was presented. What came next legally, if it came to that? She walked me through it patiently, though we both seemed to sense it likely wouldn't need to go that far. Gary called me himself that night, which surprised me. His voice was warm, grateful, entirely unaware of anything shifting beneath the surface of the plan. Denise says it's really not that big a space to share. We really appreciate this, Quinn, more than you know. I didn't correct him. I let him keep believing it a little longer. He would understand everything by Saturday morning one way or another, and there didn't seem to be much kindness in ruining his evening a day early. Get some rest, Gary, I told him instead. Big day tomorrow. He thanked me again before hanging up, and I stood in my kitchen a long moment afterward, the navy box visible on my nightstand through the open bedroom door, waiting. I didn't witness what happened at Daniel and Brooke's apartment that Friday night. Daniel told me all of it 2 days later, in pieces, still visibly shaken by it. He'd come home from work early and found a folder of paperwork on the kitchen table, a formal notice terminating their apartment lease, dated 10 days earlier, Brooke's signature at the bottom. No mention of it ever discussed with him. He confronted her immediately. She didn't deny it. I didn't want to stress you out until it was settled, she told him, arms crossed, like the explanation should have been sufficient on its own. I knew Quinn would come around eventually. She always does. I didn't think it made sense to keep paying rent here once we didn't need it anymore. Their lease had run $1,800 a month. Terminating it early meant forfeiting the security deposit, $1,200 neither of them had budgeted to lose. A detail Daniel only discovered when he called the leasing office himself the next morning to confirm what Brooke had told him. You gave notice on our home without telling me, Daniel said, based on a plan my mother never actually agreed to. It was basically agreed to. It wasn't, not really, not from her. He told me he stood in their kitchen for a long time after that, not saying anything, running through the last 6 weeks in his head. The group chat, post Brooke's insistence it was handled, her repeated assurance that Quinn was just being difficult rather than genuinely unwilling. He called me that same night, voice tight and unfamiliar. Mom, she already gave notice on our lease. We don't have anywhere to go back to if this doesn't work out Saturday. I sat with that for a moment before answering, feeling something complicated settle in my chest. Not triumph, nothing close to it. Just a quiet, aching confirmation of exactly how deep the assumption had run. "I'm not going to let you end up on the street, Daniel," I told him, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "But I'm also not going to pretend this was ever really about space in a house." "What does that mean?" "It means I've had a plan for Saturday for a while now. It's not the plan Brooke announced to the family, it's mine." He didn't push for details that night, which I appreciated. I think some part of him already sensed he wasn't going to like everything he'd hear and needed a little more time before he asked. "What are you going to do?" he asked instead, quieter now. "Exactly what I said I'd do. Show up Saturday." Another silence stretched between us, this one different from the earlier ones, less defensive, more exhausted. "I should have asked more questions weeks ago," he said finally. "I think I let it be easier than it should have been." "You're allowed to have gotten this wrong, Daniel. What matters now is what you do once you know better." He asked if he could come by the cabin Saturday morning before everyone else, just to talk. I told him he could come whenever he wanted. It was his mother's house, not a courtroom, though I understood why it might start to feel that way for a few hours. We hung up not long after. I stood in my kitchen with the phone still in my hand, thinking about how much of this had never actually been about a spare bedroom, and how long it had taken any of us to say that plainly. I spent Friday evening doing small, deliberate things. I packed the Navy box into a canvas tote bag, along with the folder from Priya's office. I checked 3 separate times that the combination lock was set correctly, that nothing would jam or stick if my hands weren't perfectly steady the next morning. I called Marilyn once more, just to confirm she'd still be out with her tomatoes around 9. I called Priya, who told me she'd have her phone nearby all morning if I needed anything clarified in real time, though she doubted I would. I laid out my clothes for the next day, plain and unremarkable nothing that said anything except that I intended to be taken seriously. I checked the weather, clear, mid-70s, a light breeze off the lake. I sat on the porch for a while before bed, listening to the water, thinking about the 11 weeks it had taken to close on this cabin, the 4 acres of Ohio farmland, the 2 rings, the $11,000 hospital bill I'd talked down to $4,000 through sheer persistence and 3 phone calls a week for a month. None of that had been about winning an argument. It had been about refusing to let circumstances make decisions I hadn't actually agreed to. Tomorrow, a moving truck would pull into my driveway believing it had already won. I'd let it arrive. I just wasn't going to let it stay on anyone's terms but my own. I went to bed earlier than usual, and somewhat to my own surprise, slept. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock, a rented moving truck turned into my driveway, gravel popping under its tires. Gary drove it. Denise followed in her own car, Brooke and Daniel arriving separately a few minutes later, along with 2 of Gary's co-workers from the hardware store who'd come to help carry boxes. Next door, Marilyn stood at her fence line in a wide-brimmed sun hat, watering can in hand, exactly where she said she'd be, tending tomatoes that in my experience did not particularly need watering that early. She caught my eye across the property line and gave a small, deliberate nod, the kind 2 people exchange when only one of them fully understands what's about to happen. Denise hugged me tightly at the door, thanking me twice in the same breath, already directing the men toward the spare bedroom down the hall, like she'd walked the layout of my house a dozen times before, though she'd only visited twice. Boxes started coming in. A lamp, a folded card table, a suitcase with a broken wheel that dragged a thin scrape across my hallway floor. I stood on the porch and watched it happen. I didn't stop anyone at the door. I didn't raise my voice or block the hallway with my body the way some version of this story might have gone. I just watched, arms crossed loosely, the canvas tote bag with the Navy box inside it, sitting on the porch swing beside me, waiting for its moment. Daniel caught my eye once from across the driveway, an unspoken question in his face. I gave him the smallest nod, enough to tell him I hadn't changed my mind about anything, and enough, I hoped, to tell him it would be all right. By 9:30, 4 boxes and a suitcase had made it into the spare bedroom. Gary's coworkers took a water break on the porch steps, wiping sweat from their foreheads in the early summer heat. Gary leaned against the truck, catching his breath, knees clearly not thrilled about the morning's work. I walked out to my car, parked at the edge of the driveway, and lifted the canvas tote bag from the passenger seat. Inside it, the navy box, its small combination lock still set to the code only I knew. And beside it, the folder from Priya's office, corners neat, nothing inside it, wrinkled or rushed. I carried both back toward the porch, feeling the weight of the box more than its actual pounds and ounces would suggest. Everyone had gathered back near the front steps by then, taking a breather before the next round of boxes, drinking water from paper cups Denise had thoughtfully brought along. I stepped into the doorway, the tote bag steady in my hands, and let a few seconds pass before I spoke, wanting to be sure I had the room's attention without needing to raise my voice for it. "Before anyone brings in more boxes," I said, keeping my tone even, almost gentle, "I need everyone to hear something." Brooke glanced up. First, a flicker of something crossing her face. Not alarm exactly, not yet. More like mild surprise that I'd chosen this particular moment to say anything at all, after weeks of what she'd clearly interpreted as compliance. I set the tote bag down on the small table by the door and opened it slowly, giving everyone time to see exactly what I was reaching for. I opened the folder first, not the box. I wanted them to see paper before anything else. "This is the deed to this cabin," I said, holding it up so the county seal was visible. "It has one name on it. Mine, Quinn Byrne. Not Daniel's, not a family trust. Mine. Purchased 4 months ago, closed and recorded at the county courthouse." Nobody spoke yet. Gary's face had already started to change, the color draining slightly from it. "This second document," I continued, "is a formal notice regarding guest terms prepared and notarized by an attorney. It states that any occupant staying beyond a short visit requires written consent from me with clearly defined terms. Nobody currently has that consent. Nobody was ever asked for it either before this morning's plans were made." "Brooke told me if I didn't like this, I could go back to the apartment," I said, my voice steady, unhurried. "I want to be clear about something. There is no back for me here. I was never leaving. This is my home." I opened the navy box, then lifted the deed's certified copy from inside it, held it beside the folder so both documents sat visible together in the morning light. "This has my name on it," I said. "Only mine." Brooke's composure cracked first. "Are you serious right now? You let us carry boxes in for an hour just to what? Humiliate us? In front of my parents?" "I didn't ask anyone to carry anything in," I said. "I watched it happen because I wanted all of you to understand clearly what was actually true, instead of what you'd decided was true weeks ago without asking me." Denise's voice rose thick with something between anger and tears. "You could have said something before we packed an entire storage unit's worth of our life into that truck. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" "I did say something," I answered, keeping my voice level even as hers climbed. "I said it in the group chat and on the phone and at your daughter's dinner table. Nobody wanted to hear it until it was said with paperwork attached." Gary said nothing at all. He stood very still by the truck, staring at the folder in my hands like it had physically struck him. One of Gary's co-workers quietly set down the box he was holding and stepped back toward the driveway, clearly deciding this was no longer a scene he wanted to be standing in the middle of. "I understand this is hard to hear," I told them quiet even. "It doesn't change what the paperwork says." Daniel stepped forward, then closer to me, closer to the folder still open in my hands. "You told my mother it's just a house," he said to Brooke, his voice not loud but carrying clearly across the driveway. "You told your parents it was already settled before you ever actually asked her. Which one of those was true?" Brooke didn't answer him directly. "You're taking her side after everything I've done for this family?" "I'm not taking a side, Brooke. I'm asking a question you don't seem to want to answer." Gary spoke up then, voice barely above a mutter, more to himself than anyone. Denise said it wasn't that big a space to share. He looked genuinely lost, like a man realizing, mid-sentence, that the ground he'd been standing on had never quite been solid. Brooke's eyes filled, but her words stayed sharp. "This is insane. We had nowhere else to go, and instead of just helping you, decided to make some kind of point in front of everyone." She didn't apologize. Not once. Not for the group chat. Not for the ultimatum. Not for the phone call I'd overheard in her own kitchen. She circled back instead to how unfair the moment felt to her. Denise's shoulders dropped slightly, some of the anger draining into something rawer. "We just didn't know where else to go, Quinn. We're scared. We're really scared." It was the first true thing she'd said all morning. I heard it, and it mattered to me, even while everything else that had been said around it did not soften. Fear doesn't excuse an ultimatum, but it can still be real underneath one, and I've never found much use in pretending otherwise. I let the silence sit for a few seconds before I spoke again. "Here's what's actually going to happen," I said. "Gary and Denise, you can stay in the finished lower level for 14 days. There's a separate entrance, a small kitchenette, enough room to be comfortable while you find something permanent. I'll have Priya draw up simple terms, an actual end date in writing, so nobody's guessing later what was agreed to." Denise opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to thank me. I kept going before she could decide which. "This isn't what Brooke announced to 11 people in a group chat. It's not what was decided for me without my knowledge. It's what I'm choosing to offer on my own terms with an end date attached. There's a difference, and today, all of you learned it." Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of moment, and I hadn't wanted it to be. Gary nodded slowly, something like relief and shame mixed together on his face. "Thank you, Quinn. I mean that." Brooke said nothing else. She walked to her car, got in, and sat there for several minutes before driving off alone, leaving Daniel standing in the driveway beside his mother instead of his wife. I watched the truck get unloaded of its remaining boxes, watched Gary and Denise carry the last of their things down to the lower level themselves this time, quietly, without an audience gathered to witness it. By 11, the truck itself pulled out, too empty now except for a card table and a lamp nobody had bothered to unload. The driveway slowly emptied. The lake kept making its small, steady sound in the background, unaffected by any of it, exactly as it had been doing since long before any of us arrived, and would keep doing long after we'd all gone. Daniel stayed to help me clean up once everyone else had gone, folding paper cups into a trash bag, stacking chairs that had never actually been needed. He noticed the necklace for the first time that afternoon, or maybe just really looked at it for the first time. "I don't think I've ever asked you about that." I told him simply where the stone had come from. The rings, the land in Ohio, the $40,000 nobody had known I needed because I'd never once asked anyone in the family to help me find it. He sat down heavily on the porch step, quiet for a long moment. "You gave up your ring for a house with your name on it," he said finally, "and I almost let someone else's name go on it instead without ever once asking what it cost you to get it." "You didn't know," I said. "That's on me, too. I never told you. Your father always said whatever I built after him should be mine outright. I think some part of me kept that a secret because it felt like something between the two of us, not something owed to anyone else's explanation." "Maybe you should have told me anyway." "Maybe," I agreed. "I'm telling you now." He reached over and squeezed my hand the way he used to when he was small and the school bus doors would close a little too fast behind him. Some gestures don't change much between 8 and 36. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, for not asking more questions, for letting it get this far before I said anything." "You said something today," I told him. "That's what mattered most." We sat there a while longer, not saying much else, the trash bag half full between us, the cousins' abandoned water cups still scattered along the porch railing. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling. The lake was calm behind us, catching the late afternoon light in long, quiet ripples. Gary and Denise stayed exactly 14 days in the lower level, exactly as the written terms said they would. On day 12, I helped Denise fill out an application for a subsidized senior apartment complex 20 minutes away, a program I'd known about from my years volunteering with the school district's Family Resource Office. They moved in the following week. Brooke had her admin access removed from the family group chat a few days later. Tasha, who'd heard the whole story from her mother, decided she'd seen enough. Brooke and Daniel started seeing a marriage counselor recommended by his primary doctor. Their first appointment scheduled for the following month. Daniel and Brooke found their own apartment 3 weeks later, a modest one-bedroom across town, $950 a month, paid for entirely on their own, without asking me for anything toward the deposit. Nobody got punished. Not exactly. Nobody went to court. Nobody lost a home permanently. Nobody was left standing in a driveway with nowhere to go. I made sure of that much myself, even after everything. They just finally got the truth in writing with a date attached to it. Sometimes that turns out to be the more lasting consequence anyway. A few weeks after the Halloways moved into their new apartment, I went back down to the dock one evening, alone, coffee gone cold in my hand. The water made the same sound it always had, small and steady against the wood pilings, the sound I'd been chasing since the day I first walked through this cabin with a realtor, and Robert's memory trailing quietly behind me. It was the sound I'd wanted from the very beginning, back when I was standing in this same spot with a realtor's clipboard and a checkbook that didn't feel quite real yet. It finally felt entirely mine again, no longer borrowed against someone else's plan for it. I spent 34 years teaching children that kindness and weakness are not the same word. It took a moving truck in my own driveway to finally teach that same lesson to the adults in my family. I sat there until the light went gray over the water, in no hurry to go anywhere else, because for the first time in a long while, I already was exactly where I meant to be. That's my story. A cabin by a quiet lake, a deed with only my name on it, and a family that finally understood what that meant. If this reminded you to protect what's actually yours, take that as a sign. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.